My name is Miriam Innes and I'm an Irish artist and I live in Gympie. I work predominantly in charcoal and in urban settings. I moved to Gympie in 2020, which was amazing. Initially, I had a very strong connection with the town when I moved here, and it was very clear to me that this was the place I wanted to stay. So I live here with my husband and 2 children. I've worked with charcoal for as long as I can remember. Throughout my career, it's been the medium that I've chosen to use. I generally work in urban settings. I've lived in many different cities and I've made a career really of capturing those cities. My work has always been concerned with transporting an audience to a place. So previously, when I execute my drawings, I've always been very mindful of the audience that they are presented to. So doing large projects and being able to transport an audience into that space. So earlier this year, in February 2022, Gympie experienced the highest flood in 100 years. That was a new experience for me, having just moved here in 2020.
This is the biggest flood in more than 100 years to hit Gympie. As we go to air tonight, the town is isolated. More than 1,000 properties, they have been inundated. There are hundreds of people in the evacuation centre. People are getting out any way they can.
The connection I had with floods came from my childhood, as we had a farm and a river running through our land. That river quite frequently would flood. It was floods that we grew up with, and we had an awareness of large volumes of water is unsafe. But the Gympie floods were completely different. It was a huge volume of water that completely destroyed people's livelihoods. And I'd never experienced anything quite as detrimental as what the Gympie floods were. It kind of stirred something within me. I had a lot of empathy for the town, which had welcomed me with open arms when me and my family moved here. And there was something that I needed to do, and I just wasn't sure what I needed to happen. So I just took my sketchbooks and I headed down to the flood, down at the end of the road, and I started to do some sketching. After I spent some time near the floodwaters and collecting sketches, I started to see many photos being posted online of what people were experiencing, what people had felt, what people were seeing. It was so evident to see that waterline in Mary Street. You'd just seen these little tops of buildings as people were driving down the main street in boats. And I thought it was just such a bizarre setting. Beneath that water is beauty of what people have created, a life that they have created from businesses that they've spent a lot of time building. And so that was my first initial idea on creating the kind of the floodscape of Mary Street, really. My idea behind the work was that it's still the beauty of the street itself is still there, but it's not evident. We can't see it. We're only seeing what the flood allows us to see, what the water allows us to see, and then when the water recedes, it reveals something that isn't always necessarily beautiful anymore. But I wanted to create a drawing that still had the beauty, is just as beautiful as it was before, but it's scarred now. There's a lot of emotion that's happened and it's wrecked a lot of people's lives. We just have to be mindful of that. It's not something that's going to be easily forgotten, and it's just a capture of the street. Even though the floods have happened there, it's still a beautiful place. So this is more of an unusual work for me. I haven't previously worked in any other tone for quite some years, and it was after visiting the riverbed, which was completely void of any colour. I felt like I needed to incorporate that tone into the artwork. I went to the top of the floodline and I started collecting the silt from leaves on the top of the floodline. After I cleaned it and filtered it and did some experiments with it, I realised it was actually quite a rich tone. And I thought that it was important to utilise that in the artwork to depict where the floodline was. Then you had a very visible way of seeing what was in the flood and what was out of the flood, without actually drawing the flood water itself. I wanted the artwork to be something that people forgot just for a second of what it represents, so what it actually shows, but be really interested in the work itself, still be able to recognise the buildings and recognise the street and recognise all the little details in there. It's a positive representation. My drawing of Gympie, Lower Mary Street, is my reactive nature to what had happened.